Hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeremy and I am the service leader for the emergency department and the trauma program manager here at Jenny Edmondson Hospital. The purpose of this brief PowerPoint presentation is to discuss the new emergency department surge policy that became effective at the beginning of this month, as well as the new surge tool that we are going to be utilizing to help determine where we're at in being overcrowded. The first thing that I kind of want to point out here is the intent and purpose of the surge policy has less to do with about how busy we are and more to do with about patient risk due to overcrowding in the emergency department. So with that in mind, the purpose that I have listed here that's on the actual policy simply reads, the steps listed in this policy aim to mitigate the patient safety risk associated with access delays for all patients and to contribute to overall patient outcomes and satisfaction. One of the big points that I want to make sure I drive home with everyone, I've discussed this with my staff as well as other inpatient leadership, is that the whole intent and purpose in this policy and in this tool is to ensure that we are able to timely and adequately assess and treat all patients who arrive in the emergency department. With that being said, I'm not going to read through all of the pieces that are on the policy. I will make sure it is attached to this message so that you can read through it on your own. I just want to highlight a few key details that I do think is important. First one being the Emergency Severity Index, or also known as ESI. This is a tool that is validated and has been around for a very long time. It essentially breaks all patients into ESI categories of either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Category 1, if you want to think of it this way, this is your patient who is actively dying or on the verge of dying, so acute, significant like respiratory failure. Your heart attack patients, in the ER we call it code 99 when there's CPR in progress. Obviously, these types of patients require a very high amount of both personnel and resources, so they will always take precedent over all of the other patients in the emergency department. The ESI of 2 is going to be those who could potentially become life-threatening if timely interventions are not made. So typically this is going to be your shortness of breath patients, your chest pain patients. We also include in this our suicidal patients because of the fact that they require one-on-one care at all times due to the risk of self-harm. And then ESI of 3, 4, and 5, I won't go through all the details, but what you need to know is basically that ESI of 3, 4, and 5 have directly to do with the number of resources that are needed in order to treat this patient. ESI is determined at the time of triage and it may change based on new information we get as we continue working up the patient. The activation and deactivation triggers for the surge policy are governed by a couple different things. First is, of course, the surge tool, which we will address here in just a little bit. But what you will notice is the surge tool itself is not listed within the policy. And that's for a couple different reasons, but the primary reason being is that the tool is an indicator. It is a piece of equipment, if you will, to help in making in the moment decisions. It does not negate the expectation of critical thinking skills, both on the emergency room triage and charge nurse, but also as well as house supervisor and other leadership. Interdepartmental responsibilities. Now, on this PowerPoint presentation, I primarily only list the ones that pertain to you guys being the administrative coordinators. In the policy itself, when you read through it, it will begin to list out in there what the expectations are for all of the other ancillary departments as well as inpatient. One thing I will note is that all of the expectations listed within the policy came about after I sat down with each of the different team service leaders. So nothing in this policy should be a surprise to any ancillary service leader or inpatient service leader or even administrative coordinators. I was very intentional about ensuring we had good buy-in for this policy as it affects everything within the hospital. For you guys specifically as the administrative coordinators, you can kind of see here, so prioritizing sitters for the ED if surge is caused by psychiatric holds. Essentially, as most of you likely already know, if we have a patient who comes in and is rating high on the Columbia screener for suicidal ideation, that then requires, both by law and policy, that there is a one-to-one sitter or care companion that is going to stay within eyesight of that patient. That is for their safety, to prevent any self-harm that may occur or harm to others. So we ask that when we reach the place where we're holding a lot of psych patients, that requires a lot of our resources. And when we're busy already with treating other medical cases, we definitely are in need of assistance during that time with care companions, sitters, nurses, whoever basically that we can get to be able to make sure that the suicidal patients are being monitored closely. Next thing here, coordination with the inpatient units, the hospitalist group, and other providers to expedite decompression of the emergency department. The number one goal of the policy as a whole is to quickly and effectively decompress the level of crowding or overcrowding within the department to ensure that we are able to safely assess and treat all patients in a timely manner. One of the things that I know has in the past been an issue, and it's not just here at Ginny Ed, it is any hospital you go to across the nation, there's always some friction between the emergency department and the inpatients. And some of this comes from the fact that we know what we do, but we don't always know what the other side does, and that can lead to wrong perceptions and arguing, fighting, those kinds of things, which I want to minimize as much as possible. Not only is it not professional, but ultimately it comes at the detriment of our patients' overall care and well-being. So to minimize any contentions that may arise between other nurses within the hospital and the emergency department, the request is that the house supervisor, or also known as administrative coordinator, will be the one to convey some of the needs, such as specific rooms, additional staffing, whatever the case may be, that will come from the administrative coordinator to those different departments. This way we ensure that there's a unity of what we're saying in our messaging, but also, again, to relieve some of that stress off of the ED nurses who are handling these overcrowded number of patients within the emergency department. Okay, so now let's talk very briefly about the Surge Tool. The Surge Triage Tool is something that actually myself and Eager came up with, and it took a lot of research, trial and error, to come up with this tool. And what you'll notice here in this slide and the next is there are essentially 8 domains that I have included into this tool. And each of these domains were specifically chosen because of the level of impact they have on the capacity in the emergency department to see and treat patients effectively. One thing I do want to point out real quickly here is that each of the domains have a number next to them, which you can see here on the slide. That number is not the score that is generated to say what level. That number is simply just a representation of, for example, let's say domain 1, where it says patients in lobby. So the 2 here would represent that there are 2 patients waiting in the lobby. Now, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner here where it says ESI 1 and 2 patients, these count both ESI 1 and 2 patients, but they are weighted, the value is weighted higher than looking at the domain of patients in lobby. And this was a very intentional thing, again, because ESI 1 and 2 patients require a lot more resources. They are a higher acuity patients. They are the ones who are at the greatest risk of negative patient outcomes if not seen, examined, and treated in a timely manner. So each of these domains that you look through here, they have different weightings, or weights, if you will, in the score they produce based on the level of impact they have for the emergency department directly. Here's the other four domains. Most of them are all fairly self-explanatory. The two things I will kind of point out here briefly is ICU beds available. A couple people have asked me why that specific domain is listed for the emergency department surge policy. And what it will tell you is this, that if we have a patient who comes in by ambulance with code 99 is the way we'll hear it, but it's CPR in progress, we want those patients treated and moved out of the ED and up to the ICU as quick as possible. And this is for a few reasons, but number one is the fact that obviously whenever there is a code in progress, that takes up pretty much all, or at least a great majority of the staff within the emergency department to be able to quickly see this patient and identify, what things need to be done and corrected. Obviously, even after this patient gets ROSC, there is still a need for one-to-one cares, and it really needs to be a nurse who is able to solely focus on that patient. So with that being said, the longer ICU patients, or patients that will ultimately be going to ICU, stay within the emergency department, the longer that we remain at a higher surge level due to the resources and staffing required to treat those patients. So for the ICU beds available, that's kind of what that number is looking at. How likely is it going to be that we're going to end up holding some of these really critical patients in the emergency department? And how will that then affect our ability to timely and adequately treat our patients in the ER? Once you have gathered the domains here and you hit the button at the bottom that shows calculate score, it will generate here a picture at the bottom below the scale that will tell you what phase or stage that we're in. So for example, in this scenario, we are in green stage. And what that simply means is that this is business as normal. We may be a little busy, but we're not overcrowded. We are able to effectively and consistently see patients in a timely manner. One of the things that I was very intentional, and not, I shouldn't say just me. Obviously, there were other people who helped with this, Monica and Megan and Eager and others who helped to decide how we built this tool. And one of the things we came up with is at the bottom of the tool, after you hit calculate surge level, it will provide for you recommended actions. Where these actions come from are based on what are often the most common things that have caused us to get to that particular surge level. So immediately, let's say you come down to the ER, we are in a later phase, which we'll get to in a second, say red. Everybody's going to be running around treating patients. So instead of having to try to track someone down to figure out what is needed in the moment, you can always begin first by simply looking at the recommended actions on the tool itself and using that information to see what steps you could potentially take immediately to help get things back into a manageable state. As you progress through the different levels here, obviously more actions are going to be listed because this is now we're having a higher surge level and a higher risk of potential patient harm. Red is the point in which we say, okay, now there's a pretty imminent risk of patient harm due to either overall volume, acuity, or staffing shortages. You'll notice down here in the recommended actions, a lot of different pieces are added to this particular stage. And that is because we recognize if we don't get a handle on it quickly in this phase here, number one, we have a higher risk of causing patient harm, but also two, this could potentially even spiral out of control to what we get here at the end, which is black stage. Hopefully this is not something you ever have to see, But obviously there are those cases, whether it's a natural disaster, some kind of mass casualty event, or even just within our hospital, something were to take place that gives us a very fast, very high volume and critical patient load, that it overwhelms the emergency department's ability to manage any of this effectively. And so this would be the time in which we'd look at things like activating incident command or moving on to diversion, all of those kind of different things. One last thing I'll say about the tool itself is that these are recommended actions. These are not necessarily me or anyone else saying you have to do every single step on here, because it may be that not all of these steps are germane to the source of the problem. Obviously, we'll still need to follow our other hospital policies as they relate to implementing diversion, and what that looks like versus also activating incident command, all of those things. You'll notice at the bottom of the policy, when you read through the policy down at the very bottom, I have put in the names of all of the other relevant policies that directly relate to the actual surge policy. Next steps from here. So for the next 60 days, and actually it's already started, what I have asked of my charge nurses is each shift they are going to run the tool, basically go through it, look at the board, and go through the steps within the Surge tool every 4 hours, and then they are going to record what score it gave them and then what date and time. The reason they're doing this is I am collecting all this data on the back end, and myself and a few others will be looking at these periodically to make sure we don't need to make further tweaks, if you will, to the actual tool itself. With this tool being something that is new in the sense that it's something that we came up with on our own based on lots and lots of research, we understand that there may be a need for refinement as we go through. And I want to assure everyone that is something that my team will be looking at very closely. I want to make sure that the tool is an accurate reflection of the emergency department and how truly overcrowded that we are. With that being said, again, kind of a brief presentation here. Please, please, please read through the policy itself. Again, I will attach it. I will also attach the link to the tool. You're welcome to save it on your guys' computer, run it whenever you want. It does not automatically store that data, so don't worry about messing anything up with it. You can play around with it, run numbers on it, see, kind of what it looks like for you. But if you come up with any questions, concerns, or even suggestions or ideas, I am always open to those. Please feel free to reach out to me via text, email, call me, whatever the case is, if you need to get a hold of me. And I will be more than happy to sit down and go through any concerns or questions that you may have. The other thing, too, that I would ask is if you notice any specific friction points that's happening, whether it's due to personnel, whether it's due to the way we're trying to implement something, please pass that information on to me. Obviously, I'm not here 24/7, and I don't always get feedback on whenever there are issues. So my request to you guys is please let me know if there's anything that is an issue that I need to look at and see if we need to come up with a workaround for that. All right, thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it, and I thank you for all the help that you guys do already. I also am going to thank you in advance for helping to put this policy and tool into action for the betterment of all of our patients here at Jenny Edmondson. Thank you.